Good afternoon and welcome to the TechBasement, episode number 4. With me is Dean Jackson,
hello,
co-host, and I am Matt Walensky. Welcome to this session. Dean, this is an unusual podcast we're doing today. We're not in the basement again.
No, obviously not in the basement. We're in the Glenmore Hotel in the Rocks. Pretty awesome. Got a fireplace, some wild game on the wall. Pretty cool stuff.
Beautiful looking audience.
Yep, awesome audience.
And this is a special session.
Yep.
We've got a few guests.
Yep.
Introduce the first lot.
Yep. So, first of all, I think we should start with, this is a special edition where we're co-hosting with Ryan Tusadi and Daniel Margie from the Fourth Wave, an audio podcast. Looking at your two shirts, did you guys know that this included video in this podcast?
Ryan just needed a free shirt, so I just bought him one, and I thought I had a second one. But this is technically actually episode number 3 for the Fourth Wave. So when we upload it on the podcast, that's what people will see.
Very
4 for TechBasement, 3 for the Fourth Wave. So.
Cool. So let's introduce our special guests, all the way from the US. One from the East Coast, the other from the US, from the West Coast of the US, Silicon Valley. So we have Jonas, who's also Swedish originally.
Yep.
And Matt Cowger. So welcome. Do you want to introduce yourselves to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Jonas Rosland. I'm a developer advocate in a small but really focused open source team at EMC called EMC Code. And I do essentially developer enablement and community management.
And Matt?
Yeah, my name's Matt. I work as an SE. I'm the only SE in the world who doesn't have a number, which is the greatest thing ever. And
Haven't you got the whole number? Isn't that?
I guess I have the whole number, but that's kind of scary for me to think about, so I just try to pretend it's not anything at all.
Awesome. So welcome. And now, is this your first trip to Australia for both of you?
Yeah. It's our first trip here. We landed a couple of days ago.
And you've experienced Aussies for about a week now. What's been the biggest takeaway? Is there something that you're going to go home and say, I did not expect that?
Well, really smart people, but I did expect that. Lots of beer drinking, but I should have expected that as well.
Yeah.
No kangaroos on the streets.
It's actually a little disappointing.
Yeah.
Matt, anything you're going to take away from this trip?
Foster's is not Australian for beer. And I don't know how you guys survive being on the internet.
It's so slow?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because we're so far away from everything that matters.
No. Oh, well, you're close to everything that matters, which is probably more likely your family, but you're really far away from Reddit. Which is kind of like
Good point. Now, Jonas, getting to know you a bit this week, we've worked out that you're a massive Star Wars fan. I think the t-shirt kind of says it all. So, question for the two of you. Favorite Star Wars character?
Jar Jar Binks. Because you can he makes everyone so angry. Everyone really, really hates him. So he's a great discussion subject because everyone has really strong feelings about it.
But I want you to, speaking of Jar Jar, there's a phenomenal, like, probably 1,800 word argument on Reddit. This one guy makes this 1,800 word argument about why Jar Jar Binks is actually a really central character and is probably a extremely powerful Sith Lord.
So there's a twist coming. I think I read that potentially. Was
So Darth Jar Jar.
I think I read that in our conspiracy, actually.
And Matt, is it Jar Jar, or do you have another favorite character?
I'm a fan of Boba Fett because he's got all the awesome gadgets. He's like the Inspector Gadget of Star Wars.
So, if you little thing you don't probably know, if you ever watch the movie Once Were Warriors, the character who plays Boba Fett in the movie is actually the same character. He's from New Zealand, and he was the person in Once Were Warriors. So
completely
different movie, but wild and crazy one that you should watch. Every Australian, New Zealand person has watched it.
Okay.
Awesome.
So Jonas and Matt, you guys are here for DevOps Geek Week, where you guys are coming here along with some customer meetings, but also to help with some of the local EMC guys and help enable them with DevOps and Agile development. Jonas, starting with you. So how did you get into DevOps? What's your background there?
So my background, I would say, started out as a consultant. And
I'm so sorry.
and as a consultant, I did a lot of stuff manually. I did a lot of manual deployments, and after a while, I got sick and tired of doing things manually because it was slow, it was error prone. So I started looking into how can I automate this. And a couple of years ago, I stumbled upon Puppet, and that really ignited everything else. And after that, it's been all in on infrastructure as code, proper monitoring, logging, and using all the DevOpsy tools and building proper processes around that.
Okay, if you had to pick a favorite, your pet favorite tool, what would it be?
Right now, it's definitely Vagrant and Docker. Yep.
You've shown me Vagrant. It's an Unreal tool, so I'll definitely be using that one.
Awesome.
Matt, what about yourself? So how did you get into to DevOps?
I got into it by doing it. Back in the day, I started at a startup company around employee 500-ish. The company was called Salesforce.com, and everybody that was in my family thought that was a terrible place to go work. It did really well for me. And in about 2008, we fundamentally changed how we were going about building things. And my team was the first team to include developers and multidisciplinary groups from sysadmins and network admins and DBAs on the team. And we found that was more effective than what the other teams were doing. And so they started doing that stuff. In 2010, Andrew Schaefer coined the term DevOps, which was what we were doing. We just didn't have a name for it. We called it the Agile Operations Team or something like that. So I got interested because I was doing it, and it was successful.
So just on that theme at Salesforce, I was just talking to the guys before, wondering if any of us had been on the front page of a newspaper before, and I know I hadn't. You guys hadn't.
No.
Apparently,
I have.
you've a major newspaper. Do you want to shed some light? Was it a good experience?
No, it was not a good experience. Back in, I think it was probably 2008 again, we had a change that we were doing to some of the core routers in the Santa Clara data center, which is where the vast majority of Salesforce production was at the time, and or San Jose rather. And so we had this change that had been fully gone through the change board and been vetted and approved and peer reviewed and all those kinds of things. And fortunately for us, that was a relatively quick process. That could happen in a day or less. Mm-hmm. And so we did that change. One of the network engineers did that change, and failed to copy I think it was one character on the end, or maybe one word on the end of a command. And so the change didn't propagate to the pair switch properly, the dual core network switches. And it caused this horrific OSPF route flap horrible thing, and brought down all of Salesforce for right around 5 hours, and it was front page news in the Wall Street Journal. And Salesforce at the time calculated downtime not just in amount of money that we lost, but also we included the amount of money that our customers lost.
Oh, no.
At the same time. And so for us, a 5-minute downtime, dollars per minute was something insane, like $43 million a minute or something ridiculous.
Far out.
Yeah, so don't get on the front page of the newspaper.
So I guess that's a good example of a manual process that's caused some sort of problem, right? Did that kickstart? Did that fuel the kind of DevOps mentality? And I don't know, it probably wasn't called that then, but.
That's not what kickstarted it. For Salesforce, more of what kickstarted it was the failure to deploy a new version of the Salesforce app for about 18 months. We just... Wow. And that's exactly the same time that Sugar CRM and NetSuite, who are fine products, there's nothing wrong with those products, but we effectively created our own competition by our failure to deliver.
Mm-hmm. So, looking at the term DevOps, I think we need to go back to that term. Quick Wikipedia search, it shows up as one of the big IT buzzwords of the year. Matt, you had mentioned the origin of the word was Andrew
Clay Schaefer.
So
Puppet.
Maybe
Clay his middle name, is that?
Clay is his middle name. I think he goes by that.
Yeah. Should just put dice in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And Jonas, if you had to describe DevOps in a few short sentences for somebody who maybe has heard the term but doesn't know what it really means, how would you describe it?
So I usually describe DevOps as a culture or a philosophy of collaboration and communication between technical teams. I think that explanation and the use of modern development technologies, methodologies like Agile to do changes and continuous improvement, I think that kind of summarizes what we mean with DevOps.
So you've used another buzzword, Agile.
Yeah.
Maybe can you explain that a little bit?
I think Matt can do that much better than I do.
That was unprompted too. That was...
That's a loaded question, so thank you very much. I think I'd probably focus on the Agile is really focusing on fast feedback cycles for learning new things, and fast feedback cycles responding to customer demand and internal demand and things like that, and then also focusing on the value of people over process. And so Agile tends to be, there are parts of Agile that when you describe them, they sound heavy, but when you implement them, they actually tend to be relatively lightweight and subject to change. And so most Agile teams, almost every Agile team has a very slightly different version of Agile than every other, which is kind of the point that let's focus on the people and how they interact and handling feedback effectively rather than thou shalt do ISO.
So on that, if you think about Agile and DevOps, and I guess interlinked, but not the same thing.
Yep.
And then you hear about tools like Puppet, Chef, Ansible. DevOps is not about tools, right? It's a cultural change. So where's the link between all those, or is there a link between all those things?
So the way I see it is that it's really hard to come up with a process that works before you see the tools that you can use in that process. So if you try to envision a process that works for your team, from writing code to having it in production, creating that process without knowing what tools are there to help you do that, it's going to be pretty hard. So I like to focus on, okay, we have an issue, we have a problem of some sort, and we need to solve that problem. It might be an inefficiency somewhere in the whole process. And we look at tools that can solve those problems, and then we can build processes around those. Right. So when we look at making our processes more efficient, we look at tools that can solve the problems, and then we build proper processes around them. Sometimes when you find a tool, it will not be the right tool. You try it, you fail, you try again with another tool, you fail again, and then you try and try and try until you find something that works. If you have to, you might write your own. There are new interesting tools popping up every day, pretty much. So there's a ton of innovation in this space right now.
I think I might disagree with that. I think I'd argue that the tools, the culture itself has, every culture has things that it wants and focuses on and that are most important. And certainly the Agile culture and DevOps culture focus on things like repeatability, reduction of risk, and time to market. And I think the tools that have come out, like you mentioned some like infrastructure as code tools, but even other ones, earlier ones, things like Travis and CI/CD systems and things like that, I think exist to empower the teams to get to those things they want, like time to market and reduction of risk. So I'm not sure that you have to. In my mind, the culture drives the existence of those tools to begin with.
Yeah. So there's tools that make the idea behind DevOps work well. Is that kind of
they help.
They help.
I would say.
Get to the dream of DevOps.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you guys have seen a few Australian customers while you've been here, some EMC customers. Yeah. What's your view on their adoption of DevOps? Are they doing it right? Is there things that they need to learn? Really interested in your opinion on that.
So the customers we've met so far, I think they are very mature in their vision and what they want to achieve. Okay. They are very much aware of tools and processes that work and those that do not. Mm-hmm. We've met some really incredible customers throughout this week that have come quite far, I would say, compared to similar customers over in the US. So I definitely see it as a positive march forward here in this market.
I was impressed by the aggressiveness. I mean, we talked to a customer last night, right, who was...
What you'd expect a large, big, traditional
Right,
customer.
it was a large, big traditional customer, and I think Matt brought up the idea with them of bimodal IT, which we've heard a lot about from IDC and Gartner and things like that. And their response was fascinating to me, which was, no, we're not interested in that. We're just going to all of it as quickly as humanly possible. Right, which is aggressive, more power to them. It's going to be hard, but I think they're all hard, and I think that's a sign that they realize the value of where they're going.
Yeah. So, and on that, one of the topics we touched on was there's DevOps, there's Agile, there's tools, and then there's cloud comes into the picture, and the idea of cloud-native applications and decomposing applications in microservices. What's your view on where that's going? Like, are organizations doing this? What does it all mean? Where are people headed, and how does this relate into the DevOps conversation?
Wow.
Another beer?
4 or 5 more beers? Yeah, we'll be good.
Well, microservices is definitely a buzzword right now. Microservices is definitely happening. We see a lot of customers embracing microservices when they create new applications and when they write new functions for old existing applications or traditional applications, or even if they want to rework an existing application into a microservices architecture. One thing about microservices is that it increases complexity. It always increases complexity because you have way more moving parts. It does increase agility and flexibility and sometimes even efficiency, but it does definitely increase complexity. So I don't think you should just dive into it head first without really thinking about what you do. But think about, how do we manage this application? It used to be a monolithic application. Now it's built out of 100 different microservices that are running out there.
So why would you do that in the first place? What's the driver to even start that process?
To be able to innovate on the individual parts more quickly.
Yeah,
Right.
We talked about this week when we look at separation of concern, where we see that we can pull apart different functions within applications and create microservices around those functions. And then each function is much, much smaller than the entire application itself. And therefore we can innovate on those functions much, much quicker.
I mean, if you think about a hypothetical large banking application, or heck, I mean, you think about some of the apps I used to run, like the Salesforce app. There was nobody at Salesforce that was capable of understanding the entirety of the application. It was simply too big for a human. And so there's also, therefore, nobody who's capable of understanding the risks and bugs and failure scenarios. If you can't understand the app, you can't understand how it's going to fail. And so if you can break that up into smaller bits, such that a person or at least a team of people can fully and truly understand that application, they're able to repair it faster, to iterate on it faster, to test it faster, and therefore derive revenue from it faster.
And we've heard lots of ideas around how to go about that. And this idea of 12-factor apps has come in. Without going into all the 12 factors, could you explain what that's all about?
Best practices for not screwing up.
Very succinct.
Fair enough.
If you guys go take a look, this week, actually, Josh McKenty, the field CTO for Cloud Foundry at Pivotal, he did a great series of tweets about taking common buzzwords and fitting a definition of them into 140 characters for Twitter. And he did one for 12-factor apps. And he mentioned some things around like disposability and composability and things like that. So I would take a look at that tweet and the whole series.
You got all the 12 factors into that?
No, he didn't. But he got the most important ideas behind those 12 factors.
Right. And so it's interesting. You talk about decomposing traditional applications. Are you seeing the traditional vendors like SAP, Oracle, eBusiness, Microsoft Exchange, SharePoint start to make that shift to this cloud native, I guess, build sort of methodology?
The way I see it right now is that the entire industry is shifting towards this. Some are more aggressive Some of them are more reluctant and will continue delivering traditionally monolithic applications.
Some have more challenges.
Some have more challenges, absolutely. But we see a shift towards this, a shift in the industry. So we're definitely seeing a lot of traditional vendors are moving towards this at different paces.
Okay, gotcha.
So I was going to jump in there actually. I've been at EMC about 9 years now, and this place has really changed. I mean, back when I was starting, Wes, who's in the audience here, he was in the channel community back then as well, and Danny, you were here. We had 3 products. I mean, it was Sims, Clarion, Networker. That was it. That was the ecosystem, right?
Back in the day, it was, you have a problem, we have a Symmetrics.
That's it. What was the question? Exactly. So there's just been a big change, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, and some of the ways we've traditionally done things has changed. Our thinking has changed. We've brought in people like Randy Bias and even guys like yourself, Matt and Jonas, not traditional EMC SEs. Did you want to just have some comments or some thoughts on the culture? I mean, you've probably seen how the culture in EMC looked before when you first joined, right? And you may have had preconceptions about what we did. You may not have even heard of us. Can you just talk a bit about the culture?
I was a customer, and I hated you.
Yeah, by hated you mean
Hated.
Hate, love, hate.
I mean, my team at Salesforce once gave me as a Christmas present a mug that had no EMC written on it.
Oh, wow.
And it was my prized possession until I left to come to EMC.
Was that the electromagnetic, metal commission? Are you sure it... No, it's... No. All right.
So I think the biggest, I think, yes, absolutely, the attitudes of many of the SEs are changing. I'm closest to the SE community, so it's sort of the thing that I understand the most. And I think the most telling thing is Jonas and I put and a couple others from EMC Code, like Kenny, put together these short, like 20 to 25 minute videos on what is NoSQL, things like that.
Training modules.
Yeah,
for all the SEs worldwide.
For all the SEs. And so they're up on our training system, and EMC SEs have to go through this quarterly accreditation training thing where they're required to watch really long, boring videos of people reading slides. And
it's fine.
And one of the things that we found was, for example, one of the ones that we did a couple quarters ago was besides the ones that were required for all people to watch, like the legal ones, like don't bribe governments kinds of ones.
Yep.
Love those ones.
The ones that we built were far and away the most watched.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly indicative of the attitude of most of VMC's technical folks.
Well, I think also the fact that even though we've brought in these new people with new ideas, we're not afraid to have those debates, those robust debates. I mean, one of the legendary ones happening in the moment is the whole nomenclature around cloud native apps versus P2 and P3. And I know, Matt, you've been a contributor to that thread. I think those robust discussions are great because you can, at the end of the day, you can find a position and you can, get people talking about it. I think it's a great thing having this culture change.
Yeah. So when I started at EMC, I used to be a consultant, as you said, and so I actually deployed EMC gear at customer sites. So I started at EMC. So I started at EMC as a VMware specialist, a V specialist within the SE organization, and then we drove the transformation of the sales campaigns to be geared towards VMware and not just geared towards how much spinning disk do you want. So that was a radical change, and we see that change continuing now with more focus on software products, software-only products, and software delivery. Instead of selling just hardware boxes with a bunch of disk in it. We're seeing more and more focus on the software delivery of things and making that easier to use from a customer standpoint as well.
So speaking of infrastructure, you brought up infrastructure, you're bringing up infrastructure. Could you briefly describe what type of infrastructure, like the characteristics a cloud native app would require? And is it possible to run cloud native apps on legacy infrastructure or vice versa?
So the way I see it, so a cloud native application can run on a P3 infrastructure and a P2 infrastructure. The infrastructure itself doesn't necessarily dictate what kind of applications you can run on top of it. When we look at more traditional infrastructures that were made to be highly available and to host traditional applications that were maybe clustered in 2 servers. That was a specific type of infrastructure to support that. Now we're moving towards other more scalable infrastructures where we can't rely on the hardware to always be available. The traditional applications are having a hard time to fit into that type of infrastructure, but the cloud native applications that are scale out or scale out able, they live better on that type of infrastructure.
So you can use the existing infrastructure to bridge, as you're spinning up cloud native apps, even though maybe it's more highly available than it's required as a bridge to get customers over.
I think you could use that application. I think you'll still gain many of the benefits around agility and things like that. If you do that, I think you will fail to realize all of the benefits of a cloud native application because you won't be able to also use the generally lower cost infrastructure to support them. Yeah. So you can gain some of those benefits, but to really gain all of the possible benefits, you're also going to want to eventually move towards something more modern is the wrong word because there's a lot of brand new, really cool stuff coming out in resilient application, but the more platform 3 designs.
Fair enough.
It's interesting. We shoot around the word legacy or historic or archaic.
Traditional.
I try to use traditional. It has a nicer ring.
Yeah.
Marketing told me to use traditional.
But it's fair enough. It's funny though. You look at things like Docker, right? Docker's relatively new, but even Docker's starting to almost get superseded in some way by some management of containers and all the newness that comes around that. And so it's really hard for people to keep up to scratch with the tooling aspect of I guess, cloud native apps and DevOps and everything around that. How have you guys, what do you guys do to kind of just stay on top of things in respect to that?
Hacker News?
Yes, Hacker News, definitely.
Okay.
But there's a great book out there. It's a short read. It's called The New Kingmakers, where they talk about how open source and cloud environments, cloud infrastructures, have driven a lot of the new innovation that's coming out right now. A lot of the new tools that are coming out are open source and could have never been created if we were stuck in traditional mode where we didn't open source anything and if we didn't have cloud resources. So when we see this explosion of tools that are happening, we see new tools on Hacker News every day. Yeah. Every day there's a new tool out there for some specific use case. There is no way any one person can be on top of everything. No. So you have to figure out what is your interest. What are you interested in? Are you interested in infrastructure as code? Are you interested in monitoring? Are you interested in deployment? And focus on that and make sure you learn those kind of tools. And continue to branch out every now and then and look at other interesting areas as well. But there is no way any one person can remember everything.
For me, I do a lot of a lot of Hacker News. B, my Amazon bill is not what my wife wishes it were. And C, I think that I have a couple applications, some that I've written, some that are off the shelf like WordPress, that I don't really actually care about the application itself, but I can use tools that I discovered to figure out, all right, I know how to deploy WordPress in a more traditional way. I know how to deploy WordPress on Docker. Let's try to deploy WordPress with Terraform and see how that's different. So I'm using a basis of what I know to give me some structure to learn the rest. Yeah. Okay. After I deploy that WordPress and make it work, I don't actually use it for anything. I just kill it, destroy it. I'm not. The point is not to deploy a blog. The point is not to run a blog. The point is to learn how to, for example, deploy that blog.
Learn the tools.
Learn the tool.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So we're going to wrap up in a moment. Before we do, I heard you guys on the Hot Aisle. I think you're on separately.
Yep.
But Matt, they mentioned the term web scale, and you reacted. I think you said if you say that term one more time, I'm going to punch you in the face. Is that?
Yeah, that's about right. That's about right.
So obviously that word is not cool to use from I guess your thinking at least, or at least the world we're heading towards. Are there any other terms, advice for people that we should avoid? Anything else that kind of was cool that isn't anymore?
Pet hates.
Is
God, you're gonna.
DevOps tools was one.
Oh
as a
no, I'm gonna go
phrase.
in. This is one that EMC uses a lot. DevOps workload.
Yes.
DevOps workload.
Yes.
DevOps workload.
What does that
What is
mean?
Exactly. What does that mean? If you think about DevOps as this change in culture, and the closest thing that really makes any sense to a DevOps workload is like HR changing people's reporting structures. That's the closest thing to what it does. What people mean when they say a DevOps workload is they're talking one tiny part of things like continuous integration, continuous delivery, which tend to drive a lot of certain kinds of storage and compute workloads that tend to be very expensive, and therefore EMC and Dell and HP tend to love them. Mm-hmm. But those are not a DevOps workload. Those are a continuous integration workload that is part of an overall theme.
Yeah.
So yeah, DevOps workload, I cringe every time I see it.
Anything bugs you? You're good with it all.
No, I'm pretty good with most terms, but I totally agree there with DevOps workload. That is one of my pet peeves.
All right. Well, look, it's we're running to the end of our session. Thank you, Matt and Jonas. It's been an absolute pleasure having you out here this week. We've had our awesome DevOps Down Under week. I've learned there's some sort of synergy between Agile, DevOps, Platform 3, and a lot of beer this week. So that's definitely that. I want to thank you guys for taking the time and being part of the show today. So thanks to our co-hosts.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you.